I remember the temperature of the recruitment station on Bravest 7, 31 degrees Celsius. The air tasted of rust and promethium exhaust. I was 17 standard years old. My parents had died 6 months prior in a factorum collapse. Structural failure, 1,200 casualties. The overseer logged it as acceptable loss margins. The Imperial Navy recruiter wore a uniform so clean it seemed obscene in that place. He asked if I wanted to serve the Emperor. I said yes, because there was nothing else to say. The alternative was the corpse starch facility. They processed us in batches of 200. I remember being weighed. 63 kilograms. Blood type catalogued. Dental records archived. They shaved our heads in assembly line efficiency. Hair fell in drifts that junior ratings swept into disposal chutes every 15 minutes. The razor was not cleaned between candidates. I felt the vibration of the clippers against my skull. The sound was a mechanical drone that made my teeth ache. We boarded the shuttle at dawn. I had never left Bravest 7. I had never seen my world from orbit. Through the viewport, the planet became a sphere of brown and gray. Hive cities like rust lesions across dead stone. Then we crossed into the dark, and there was nothing but stars and the distant running lights of the fleet. Someone 3 rows ahead vomited from the acceleration. The smell filled the cabin. No one cleaned it. We sat in it for 4 hours until we reached the ship. The Undying Malice was a dictator-class cruiser, 8 kilometers from prow to stern. I learned later it had been commissioned in M39. That meant it had served for nearly 2,000 years when I first walked its corridors. The docking bay was vast enough to swallow our entire shuttle without the walls seeming closer. The deck plates vibrated with the frequency I felt in my sternum. The air smelled wrong, recycled too many times, thick with incense that didn't quite cover the smell of coolant and something else, something organic and old. They lined us up in ranks of 20. A petty officer walked the line with a data slate, reading assignments. Most went to gunnery crews or maintenance divisions. I was assigned to Section 17, Port Dorsal Quarter, Environmental Systems Maintenance. The petty officer did not look at me when he said it. He was already reading the next name. I followed the painted deck markers, yellow lines on dark metal, faded from centuries of boots. The corridors were narrow. Pipes and cables ran along the ceiling in tangles that looked more like growth than design. Every 30 meters there were small shrines, icons of the Emperor, candles, prayer strips. Most were recent. Some were old enough that the wax had fossilized into mineral deposits. Section 17's barracks held 40 ratings. Bunks stacked 4 high, welded to the bulkheads. A table, lockers with broken doors. The ratings already there looked up when I entered, assessed me in silence, returned to whatever they were doing. A man with burn scars across his scalp gestured to an empty bunk. 3rd tier. I climbed up and lay down and felt the vibration of the ship through the thin mattress. That night, I learned about the ship. The rating in the bunk below me was named Corvin. He had been aboard for 8 months. He spoke quietly, as if the walls were listening. Perhaps they were. "The ship doesn't like us," he said. I asked what he meant. "You'll see. Doors close when they shouldn't. Systems fail. Environmental controls malfunction in specific sections at specific times. The tech priests say it's the machine spirit. They say we haven't performed the proper rites. They say we need to pray more, anoint more, sanctify more. We do. It doesn't help. I asked if he was saying the ship was haunted. I'm saying the ship kills us, not in battle, not honorably. It kills us in accidents that aren't accidents. You'll understand after the first one. I did not believe him. I thought it was the sort of story veterans told new recruits to unsettle them, hazing through superstition. I had been raised in the hives. I knew machinery. Machines broke down. Systems failed. That was the nature of old equipment. The first death happened 6 days after I arrived. His name was Petrus. Engineering rating assigned to coolant monitoring and the dorsal heat exchange networks. I had spoken to him twice. Brief exchanges in the mess hall. He seemed competent, careful. He had served aboard for 3 months without incident. The coolant line ruptured while he was performing routine inspection. Superheated vapor, 340 degrees Celsius, filled the compartment in 4 seconds. The pressure hatch sealed automatically. Emergency protocols. The hatch should have opened when the pressure equalized. It did not. Petrus was trapped inside for 11 minutes while the vapor cooked him. We heard him screaming through the bulkhead. The sound carried through the ship's metal bones, distorted but recognizable. Then it stopped. When they finally overrode the hatch, manually, because the automatic systems refused every command, they found him fused to the deck plating. The recovery team needed cutting equipment to extract the body. The tech priest who investigated spent 3 hours in the compartment. I watched him work through the open hatch, robed in red, face hidden behind a rebreather, mechadendrites probing the ruptured coolant line and the sealed hatch mechanism. When he emerged, he declared the rupture a result of insufficient consecration. The machine spirit had not been properly honored. He prescribed additional prayer protocols and anointing rituals for all coolant systems. We performed them. Every shift began with 15 minutes of prayer. We anointed the pipes with blessed oils. We chanted the litanies exactly as instructed. The ship's systems did not improve. 17 days later, a gravity plate failed in the port munitions hold. Only one plate. In a hold containing 87 identical plates, one failed. Crewman Del Saro was standing on it when it inverted. Gravitational force reversed. 0.7 g downward became 0.7 g upward. He was thrown into the ceiling at terminal velocity. The impact split him open. Blood and internal matter adhered to the ceiling in a pattern the cleanup crew documented before they scraped it away. The gravity plate resumed normal function 6 minutes after his death. The tech priests found no mechanical fault. They prescribed additional rites. I began to understand what Corvin meant. The ship killed selectively, not randomly. Specific systems failed in the presence of specific individuals. A hatch that worked perfectly for 30 ratings would seal on the 31st. Environmental controls that maintained stable temperature would flood a compartment with heat or cold, but only when occupied. Machinery that ran smoothly for hours would fail catastrophically the moment someone stood too close. We died slowly, 1 per week on average, sometimes 2. Once, during a particularly bad month, we lost 7. The ship continued to function. In battle, it performed flawlessly. Weapons systems fired with perfect accuracy. Engine output remained stable. Shield generators operated at optimal capacity. The Undying Malice had one of the highest combat effectiveness ratings in the battle fleet. Ship to ship, it was a masterpiece of lethality. It simply hated its crew. I learned to read the signs. The vibration in the deck plates changed pitch before incidents. The air temperature fluctuated, sometimes just half a degree, but noticeable if you paid attention. The incense smoke from the shrines moved strangely, curling against ventilation patterns. When these signs appeared, I moved to a different section. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes the ship found me anyway. 3 months into my service, I met Helorn. He was a senior rating, 32 years old, with 11 months aboard. That made him ancient by Section 17 standards. Most ratings lasted 4 to 6 months before transfer, death, or breakdown. 11 months meant either extraordinary luck or extraordinary skill at reading the ship's moods. I first saw him in the number 4 water reclamation station. I was performing maintenance, cleaning filters, checking pressure valves, all routine. He was standing in the doorway, watching me work. He was tall, thin in the way people become when they've been underfed for years and never quite recovered. His eyes were gray. He had a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a clean line like something had been measured and cut precisely. "You're the new one," he said. "Not a question." I confirmed my assignment date. "You've lasted longer than most. You paying attention to the ship?" I told him I was trying to. "Good, keep trying. The ship notices who notices." I asked what he meant. He stepped into the compartment. The door closed behind him. Smooth, normal operation. He moved to the water tank, placed his hand flat against the metal. "The ship is aware. I don't know if it's the machine spirit the priests talk about, or if it's something else. Something older. But it watches. It chooses. If it thinks you're afraid, it pursues. If it thinks you're ignoring it, it punishes. You have to walk a line. Acknowledge it without showing fear. Respect it without worship." I asked if that kept him alive. "So far. Mostly. I've been injured 4 times. Minor incidents. Warning shots. I adjusted my behavior after each one. The ship accepted the adjustments." He showed me the injuries. Burns on his left forearm from a coolant splash that should have been contained. A crushed finger from a hatch that closed too quickly. A scar on his ribs from a fall when a ladder rung snapped. Each incident survivable. Each incident pointed. He had learned to interpret them as communication. I asked if he ever considered requesting transfer. Twice. Both times the request was denied. The ship needs crew. The Navy won't decommission an effective warship just because it has a high mortality rate. We're more replaceable than it is. They send new ratings every month. The ship burns through us and continues. It's been doing this for centuries. Over the following weeks, Helorn taught me what he'd learned. How to read the deck vibrations. Which sections were safest at which hours. How to time your movements to minimize exposure to the ship's attention. He showed me the sections where crew had died most frequently. He'd kept records marked on a schematic he'd drawn himself. Patterns emerged. The ship favored certain locations. It returned to them cyclically. We began working together when schedules allowed. The ship seemed less hostile when Helorn was present. Or perhaps it was simply that his awareness created a buffer. He could sense the warning signs faster than I could, pulling us both to safety before incidents occurred. I began to rely on his instincts. He began to rely on my willingness to learn. 4 months into my service, during a maintenance cycle in the lower engineering decks, Helorn told me why he stayed. "I had a brother," he said. "He was assigned to the Malice a year before me. Different section, different duties. I requested assignment here to serve with him. By the time I arrived, he was dead. Electrical fire in his quarters. The door wouldn't open. He burned while 3 other ratings stood outside trying to override the lock. I asked why he didn't transfer after learning that. Because leaving would mean his death was meaningless. Just another casualty in the crew turnover statistics. If I stay, if I survive, I can remember him as more than a line in a casualty report. I can testify that he existed, that he mattered. I understood then. Halorn was not surviving for himself. He was surviving as an active witness. As long as he lived, his brother's death remained in living memory rather than archived data. I asked his brother's name. Merrick. He was 20 years old. He liked to carve wood. Little figures, animals mostly. He made me a bird once when we were children. I still have it, kept it in my locker. The ship killed him 3 weeks later. We were working in the dorsal lance battery maintenance corridor. Capacitor inspection. Tedious work, but necessary. The lance batteries drew enormous power. Capacitors degraded over time. Failures during combat could result in catastrophic energy discharge. Our job was to identify failing components before they became critical. Halorn was 30 meters ahead of me, scanning capacitor Bank 7. I was still working on Bank 5. The corridor was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 men to pass. The walls were lined with power conduits, all humming with the baseline charge the ship maintained even when weapons were offline. The deck vibration changed. I felt it before I understood it. The pitch shifted down, then spiked. Halorn looked up. Our eyes met. He knew. He started moving toward me. Not running. Running in a ship corridor drew attention. He walked quickly, deliberately, as if he had simply finished his work and was moving to the next task. The lights in the corridor dimmed. The capacitors began to whine, a rising frequency that meant charge buildup. Emergency discharge should have activated automatically. It did not. Halorn was 10 meters from me when the conduit behind him ruptured. Electrical arc, bright enough to leave after images. The smell of ozone and burning insulation. The arc didn't ground to the nearest conductive surface the way physics dictated. It grounded through Halorn, through his chest. He convulsed once, muscles seizing from current overload, and collapsed. I reached him in 4 seconds. His chest was burned through. A hole the width of my fist, cauterized at the edges, exposing ribs and deeper structures I did not have time to catalog. His eyes were open. He was still breathing. Shallow, rapid, each breath bubbling through fluid filling his lungs. I attempted to activate the emergency medical alert on my Vox bead. The Vox produced only static. I tried the manual alarm on the wall panel. The panel did not respond. The ship had isolated us. Halorn looked at me. He was trying to speak. I leaned closer. "Notices," he managed, blood on his lips. "You, now." I asked what he meant. "Ship watches you. Now. I'm done. Your turn." I told him to save his strength. Medical teams would arrive. He would survive this. He smiled. Blood on his teeth. Liar. His breathing stopped 30 seconds later. I logged the time automatically without thinking, a habit trained into all crew. 22:47, ship time. Crewman Halorn, Section 17. Deceased. I sat with his body for 11 minutes before the corridor lights returned to normal and the Vox bead crackled back to functionality. I reported the casualty. The recovery team arrived 14 minutes after that. They extracted the body with the same efficient disinterest they showed all corpses. One team member noted the cause of death for his report: electrical accident, faulty conduit, recommendation, additional consecration of power systems. I returned to my quarters and found Helen's carved bird in my locker. He must have placed it there at some point, perhaps anticipating this outcome. The wood was dark with age, worn smooth from handling. The bird's wings were spread as if caught mid-flight. I placed it on the small shelf above my bunk, the only personal item I kept. The ship noticed me after that. Halorn had been correct. The ship's attention shifted to me after his death. I became the object of its focus in ways I had not experienced before. Small incidents first. A hatch closing faster than expected. Not fast enough to injure, but close enough that I felt the air displacement against my back. A deck plate that shifted slightly under my weight, producing a grinding sound from the mechanisms beneath. The temperature in my quarters dropping 3 degrees below standard, just enough to prevent comfortable sleep. These were not system malfunctions. These were communications. I responded as Halorn had taught me. I acknowledged each incident without showing fear. When a hatch closed too quickly, I placed my hand against it and spoke aloud. I understand. When the temperature dropped, I performed the prayer rituals at the small shrine in the barracks with precise attention to detail. When deck plates shifted, I adjusted my walking patterns to avoid the affected areas while maintaining my work efficiency. The ship seemed to accept this. The incidents continued but did not escalate. I began to understand what Halorn had meant about walking a line. The ship wanted acknowledgement of its presence, its power, its autonomy. It did not want worship. The tech priests provided that in abundance, and it killed them as readily as anyone else. It wanted something closer to respect between adversaries. Recognition that we existed in the same space and that it held ultimate authority. I survived my 6th month, my 8th, my 10th. Crews cycled around me. New ratings arrived in batches, wide-eyed and uncertain. Most died within their first 3 months. A few adapted and lasted longer. Fewer still made it past 6 months. I watched them all and said nothing about what I had learned. The ship chose who it taught. I was not arrogant enough to believe I could override its curriculum. During my 11th month, a new rating arrived who caught my attention. His name was Seth. 19 years old, recruited from a mining colony in the segmentum Tempestus. He had the careful hands of someone accustomed to delicate work. Explosives placement, I learned later. Demolitions training before Navy recruitment. He was assigned to Section 17, to environmental maintenance like most new crew. I noticed the ship did not touch him. For 3 weeks, Seth worked in the most hazardous sections without incident. Hatches opened smoothly for him. Systems functioned properly in his presence. Temperature and gravity remained stable in any compartment he occupied. It was statistically anomalous. By all patterns, he should have experienced at least 1 incident by then. I observed him more carefully. He moved through the ship without fear, but also without the hypervigilance most crew developed. He seemed unconscious of the danger around him, working with steady efficiency and nothing more. He did not perform extra prayers at the shrines. He did not speak about the ship's reputation. He simply existed within its spaces as if he belonged there. During a shared meal period in the mess hall, I asked him if he had noticed anything unusual about the ship. "It's old," he said. older than anything I worked with on the mining station, but it functions. Maintenance protocols are more complex, more ritual. Otherwise, it's just machinery. I asked if anyone had told him about the casualty rates. Corvin mentioned something. Said the ship was unlucky, high accident frequency. I've seen the shrine markers in the corridors, lot of recent names. He paused, considering. You think there's something more to it? I told him the ship was aware, that it killed selectively, deliberately, that most crew did not survive their first 6 months. He absorbed this information without visible reaction. And you've survived almost a year. I confirmed this. How? I explained what Halorn had taught me. The signs, the patterns, the need to acknowledge without showing fear. I told him about the warnings, the vibrations, the temperature shifts, the changes in how the air moved. Seth listened until I finished. Then he said, I appreciate the information, but I think I'll continue as I have been. Seems to be working. I did not press the matter. The ship chose its own methods. If it was leaving Seth untouched, that was between him and it. 4 weeks later, the ship killed the rating in the bunk next to Seth. Atmospheric seal failure in a maintenance corridor. Crewman Venn suffocated over the course of 6 minutes while the emergency bulkheads refused to close and portable respirators malfunctioned in sequence. Seth was not present during the incident. He returned to find the body being removed. He found me in the water reclamation station that evening. I was performing routine filter maintenance. He stood in the doorway the way Halorn had, months earlier. Tell me again, he said. Everything you know about the ship. I told him. This time he listened with different attention. He asked questions about specific incidents, about patterns, about the progression of the ship's attention. I answered everything I could. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. It took someone close to me to make it real, he said finally. Venn was in the bunk next to mine. We talked every night before sleep, just small things. He told me about his family. He had a daughter he'd never met, born after he shipped out. He carried a picked capture of her. She was 3 months old in the image. Seth's hands were steady, but his voice carried something I recognized. The moment when abstract statistics became specific grief. The ship killed him 30 centimeters from where I sleep. I told him the ship was demonstrating its reach, showing Seth that his immunity was conditional, that it could touch him whenever it chose. Then why doesn't it? I said I did not know, that the ship's logic was not fully interpretable, that perhaps it had a use for him beyond the standard crew function. Over the following weeks, Seth and I worked together frequently. He learned quickly, faster than I had. He developed an instinct for the ship's moods that rivaled what Halorn had possessed. The ship continued to leave him largely untouched, but it killed 3 other ratings in Section 17 during that period. Each death occurred in Seth's vicinity. Not close enough to harm him, but close enough that he witnessed the aftermath. The ship was teaching him something. I did not understand what. During my 14th month, the Undying Malice engaged in the first major fleet action since my assignment. The battle fleet encountered an orc attack wave in the Tertius system. 17 vessels, ranging from crude attack ships to a massive space hulk that read on augurs as 12 kilometers of welded wreckage and weapons. We went to battle stations at 0400 ship time. I was assigned to damage control teams. My role was to respond to hull breaches and system failures during combat, performing emergency repairs while the ship maneuvered and fired. Seth was assigned to the same team. We equipped ourselves with repair tools, void suit components, and moved to our designated staging area in the port mid-deck section. The engagement lasted 7 hours. The ship was beautiful in combat. Every system performed beyond specification. Lance batteries fired with perfect synchronization. Macro cannons maintained continuous bombardment patterns. Void shields absorbed impacts that should have collapsed them and regenerated faster than the tech priest's models predicted. The Undying Malice destroyed 4 Orc vessels personally and contributed to the destruction of 3 others. When the Space Hulk finally broke apart under combined fleet fire, our ship was credited with delivering 23% of the killing strikes. During those 7 hours, not a single crew member died to internal malfunction. Systems that routinely failed during normal operation ran flawlessly. Hatches opened on command. Gravity remained stable. Environmental controls maintained optimal conditions. Even the damaged sections, we took 3 significant hits that breached the hull, behaved predictably. Bulkheads sealed properly. Emergency protocols functioned as designed. We repaired what could be repaired and isolated what could not, and the ship supported us in this work. In battle, the ship was not our enemy. It was our weapon and our fortress. It protected us because we were necessary to its function. It needed us alive to crew its stations, to load its weapons, to repair its wounds. The malevolence was absent, or perhaps merely dormant, subordinated to combat imperatives. When the engagement ended and the Orc fleet was destroyed, we secured from battle stations. The transition back to normal operations took 40 minutes, weapons safed, systems returned to baseline power consumption, damage reports compiled and transmitted to Fleet Command. The first death occurred 43 minutes after we secured from battle stations. Engineering rating host, assigned to Lance battery coolant systems. The same systems that had performed flawlessly during 7 hours of continuous combat. A pressure seal failed while he was inspecting it. Superheated coolant severed both his legs below the knee. He bled out before medical teams arrived. The seal had been functioning normally up until the moment he touched it. The ship had returned to its default state. Over the next week, we lost 6 more crew, all to malfunctions in systems that had worked perfectly during combat. The message was clear. In battle, we were useful. Outside battle, we were fuel. The ship consumed us to sustain itself between the moments when it actually needed us functional. I began to understand the full scope of what we were. Not crew, not even slaves. We were a consumable resource, like promethium or ammunition. The ship used us up at a calculated rate, fast enough to satisfy whatever hunger drove it, slow enough that replacements could arrive and be minimally trained before they died in turn. The Navy accepted this arrangement because the ship's combat effectiveness outweighed the personnel costs. Crew were replaceable. A cruiser with the Malice's combat record was not. During my 16th month, I made my choice. We received a new rating. His name was Petrock, 17 years old, assigned directly from recruitment processing. He had the soft look of someone from a civilized world, not hive-born, not factory-forged. Somewhere with natural light and food that wasn't synthetic. He was terrified from the moment he stepped aboard. I could see it in how he moved, how his eyes tracked every sound, every movement in the corridors. The ship noticed him immediately. Small incidents clustered around Petrock within his first week. A hatch closed on his hand. Not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to bruise deeply. A gravity fluctuation caused him to fall and strike his head. Temperature drops in whatever compartment he occupied. The ship was playing with him, the way a cat plays with injured prey. Seth and I observed this. We did not intervene. Petrock approached me during a meal period, his hands shaking around his recaf cup. They told me this ship was haunted. I thought it was stories to scare new crew. But it's real, isn't it? The ship is killing us deliberately. I confirmed this. How do I survive? I could have told him what Halorn taught me. I could have shown him the patterns, explained the signs, given him the tools to possibly endure. I had done this for Sev. I could have done it for Petrock. I looked at him and saw someone who would not survive regardless. The fear was too deep. The ship fed on fear. Even if he learned the patterns, even if he performed the rituals correctly, his terror would mark him. The ship would pursue him until it finished what it had started. More than that, I understood in that moment that helping him would draw the ship's attention more fully to me. It would mark me as someone attempting to interfere with its feeding. I had survived by acknowledging the ship's authority, by accepting my place within its logic. Helping Petrock would violate that arrangement. I told him to pray more, to perform the anointing rituals exactly as the tech priests prescribed, to trust in the Emperor's protection. He thanked me. He believed me. He thought I had given him useful information. Seth was sitting 3 meters away. He had heard the entire exchange. Our eyes met. He said nothing. He understood what I had done. Petrock died 11 days later. Coolant line rupture. Same as the first death I witnessed. The pattern repeating. He screamed for 14 minutes before the heat killed him. I was in the adjacent compartment. I could have attempted to override the hatch. I could have tried to extract him. I did not. I logged his death when the screaming stopped and continued my assigned maintenance tasks. That night, in the barracks, Seth sat on the edge of my bunk. The carved bird was on the shelf above us, wings spread in permanent flight. "You could have helped him," Seth said quietly. I said yes, I could have. "But helping him would have endangered you." I said yes. "So you let him die to maintain your arrangement with the ship?" I said yes. Seth was quiet for a time. Then, "I understand. I would have done the same." That was when I knew we had both crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. We had become part of the ship's mechanism, not just victims surviving its predation, but participants in selecting the prey. We acknowledged the deaths around us as necessary to our own continuation. We had been consumed not physically but morally, transformed into components of the system that destroyed us. The ship accepted this. The incidents around me decreased in frequency. I had demonstrated that I understood my role. I was not fighting the pattern anymore. I was supporting it. Months passed. I stopped counting them precisely. Time became segmented by deaths rather than dates. The rating who burned in his quarters. The one who suffocated when atmospheric controls failed. The one who was crushed when a cargo loader activated with him beneath it. I witnessed them all. I logged them all. I helped none of them. Seth and I survived together, a partnership built on shared complicity. We taught new crew the basic maintenance tasks they needed to perform. We did not teach them how to survive. The ship chose who survived. We had learned not to interfere with its selection. During what I estimated was my 22nd month, records had become less precise, the ship's chronometers sometimes displaying inconsistent data. The undying Malice entered extended warp transit. We were being redeployed to a different sector, a journey that would take 6 weeks through the Imperium. Warp transit changed the ship. The malevolence intensified. Incidents occurred with greater frequency and creativity. Crew died not just from system malfunctions, but from phenomena that had no mechanical explanation. A rating was found in a sealed compartment. His body aged to skeletal remains while the chronometer showed only 8 hours had passed since he entered. Another simply vanished from his post, disappeared between one moment and the next, never found. Environmental controls in one section began cycling through temperature extremes every 40 seconds, freezing to superheated and back, creating a zone where biological matter could not survive. The tech priests performed constant rituals, burning through blessed oils and sacred incense at triple the normal rate. The prayers grew more desperate. Several tech priests requested to perform extreme rites, self-mortification ceremonies they insisted would appease the machine spirit. The ship's captain authorized these. I witnessed one. A tech priest suspended in a maintenance bay, his flesh pierced with sacred data cables, chanting the binary cant while his mechadendrites carved prayers into his own augmented tissue. He maintained the ritual for 14 hours before dying from blood loss and system shock. The ship's violence did not decrease. If anything, it intensified in the compartments nearest to where the ritual occurred. Seth and I retreated to the deepest sections we could access. We found a small storage hold in the lower engineering decks, rarely used, containing archived components from ancient repairs. We moved our essential equipment there and spent our off-shift hours in its relative safety. The ship seemed less focused on this space. Perhaps it was too old, too deep in the vessel's structure. Perhaps the machine's attention was concentrated elsewhere. We rarely spoke during those weeks. What was there to say? We maintained our duties when required. We survived the hours between duties. We waited for the warp transit to end. On the 39th day of transit, Seth broke the silence. "Do you think about leaving?" I said leaving was not possible. We were in warp. Even if we could reach an escape pod, launching into the Imperium was death. I mean after. When we reach port, requesting transfer. Go in AWOL. Anything. I told him I had considered it, that such requests were routinely denied, that the ship needed crew and the Navy prioritized the ship's needs over individual crew survival. What if we sabotaged something, made ourselves too unreliable to keep aboard? I asked if he was serious. No, maybe. I don't know. He was quiet for a moment. I'm trying to remember why I wanted to survive. In the beginning, it made sense. Survive because living is better than dying. But now, I've helped this ship kill dozens of people by not warning them, by not helping them, by choosing my survival over theirs. What's the difference between me and the ship? I said we were not the ship. We were its victims, acting under duress. Are we? The ship isn't pointing a weapon at us, forcing compliance. It's just existing, being what it is. We're choosing to participate in its pattern because participation increases our survival probability. That's agency. That's choice. I had no answer. He was correct. We were not innocent. We returned to normal space on the 42nd day. The warp translation was smooth, the Gellar fields disengaging without incident. The ship settled into real space with what I imagined was satisfaction, though assigning emotion to a vessel was anthropomorphization without basis. The incident rate decreased after we returned to real space. Not to normal levels, but below the intensity of warp transit. We had lost 37 crew during those 6 weeks. Replacements were scheduled to arrive within the month. The cycle would continue. I had been aboard for 2 years by my best calculation. That made me ancient by Section 17 standards. I was not the longest-serving rating. There was one other, a man named Kellys, who had survived 3 years through a combination of caution and apparent invisibility to the ship's attention. But I was among the very few who measured their tenure in years rather than months. Seth had survived 16 months. Together we formed an informal leadership in Section 17. New crew looked to us for guidance, recognized our survival as indicating some form of knowledge worth learning. We taught them maintenance procedures. We did not teach them survival. The ship still chose. During my 26th month, we received a new rating who reminded me of Halorn. His name was Kell. 23 years old, tech aptitude scores high enough that he could have qualified for fuller tech priest training if he'd been born to a different social stratum. He learned quickly, asked intelligent questions, demonstrated the kind of awareness that might enable long-term survival. The ship left him alone initially. I watched the pattern repeat. The grace period where new crew experienced normal operations before the malevolence manifested. With Kell, that grace period extended longer than usual. 5 weeks without incident. I found myself wanting to warn him, to give him what Halorn had given me, the knowledge that might let him survive beyond the statistical norm. Seth noticed my attention. "You're thinking about teaching him." I said I was considering it. The ship won't like that. You learned from someone the ship had chosen. I learned from you after the ship marked me. But reaching out unsolicited, trying to expand the survival cohort beyond what the ship naturally selects, that's interference. I said I knew that. And you're considering it anyway. I was. Kell represented something I thought had been fully consumed. The impulse to reduce suffering around me even at cost to myself. Helping him would endanger me. I understood this. But the alternative was watching someone with genuine survival potential die because I prioritized my own safety. Before I could decide, the ship made the decision for me. Kell was assigned to a repair task in the dorsal sensor array. Routine maintenance, replacing degraded components. I was assigned to the same task. We worked together for 4 hours, efficient and professional. He was competent, careful, methodical. Exactly the kind of crew member the ship should have valued. We were in a narrow maintenance crawlway, surrounded by sensor equipment and data conduits. The only exit was behind us, a single access hatch, 30 meters back. The hatch sealed. I felt it through the deck vibration, the characteristic magnetic clamp of emergency containment. Kell noticed a moment later, reading it in my reaction. "That's not scheduled," he said. I said no, it was not. The temperature began to rise. Not quickly. Not the superheated flash that had killed Petrus years ago. A gradual increase, 1 degree every 30 seconds. Methodical. calculated to extend the experience rather than end it quickly. Kell immediately moved to the hatch. I followed. We attempted every override protocol we knew. Manual releases, electronic commands, emergency bypass procedures. Nothing responded. The hatch remained sealed, the magnetic clamps holding it secure against the bulkhead. The temperature was 33 degrees. 35. 38. The crawlway was small, unventilated. Heat accumulated without dissipation. Kell tried his Vox bead. Static. Mine produced the same result. We were isolated, communication cut, trapped in a space that was slowly cooking us. 42 degrees. We were sweating now, the heat becoming uncomfortable. Kell removed his outer work jacket. I did the same. We returned to the hatch, searching for any mechanism we might have missed. There was nothing. The ship had sealed us perfectly. "This is deliberate," Kell said. His voice was steady, but I heard the fear beneath. I confirmed this. "Why?" I told him the ship killed crew regularly, that it was malevolent, not merely malfunctioning, that it chose its victims according to logic we did not fully understand. "You knew this?" Not a question, an accusation. I said yes. "And you didn't warn me?" "Didn't warn anyone." I said warning people did not help them, that the ship chose regardless. That interference endangered the one interfering. 47 degrees. We were both drenched in sweat now. Breathing was becoming labored, the hot air searing our throats and lungs. The sensor equipment around us was beginning to smell of overheating components. "You let people die to save yourself." I said yes. Kell stared at me. "Then why are you here? If you prioritize your own survival, you should have refused this assignment. Should have avoided me." He was correct. I had not avoided this assignment. Some part of me had wanted this confrontation, this accounting. I had survived by complicity. Perhaps I had reached the point where continued survival felt worse than conclusion. 51 degrees. We could not stand anymore. We sat against the bulkhead, conserving energy, breathing shallow. The heat was entering the dangerous range. Much higher and biological damage would begin, proteins denaturing, cells failing. "How long?" Kell asked. I did not know. The ship could maintain this temperature indefinitely. We would die from hyperthermia eventually. An hour, perhaps. Maybe 2. We sat in silence. 54 degrees. 57. My vision was beginning to blur at the edges. Kell was semi-conscious, his head against the bulkhead, eyes half closed. At 61 degrees, the temperature stopped rising. We waited. Nothing changed. The temperature held steady, agonizing, but not immediately lethal. The ship was keeping us exactly at the threshold. Not killing us, not releasing us, demonstrating its control. I do not know how long we remained there. Time became unmeasurable, each moment identical to the last. Consciousness fragmented. I drifted through memories, the recruitment station, the first deaths I witnessed, Halorn's face, the carved bird, Petrox screaming, all the moments of choice where I had selected survival over moral action. The temperature began to decrease. Slowly, 1 degree every few minutes, 60 degrees, 59, 58. The ship was releasing us incrementally, extending the experience. At 48 degrees, the hatch unsealed. Cool air rushed into the crawlway. Relatively cool, the normal ship temperature of 22 degrees, feeling arctic after what we had endured. I managed to stand. Kell did not move. I checked his pulse. Weak but present, He was unconscious, his body having shut down non-essential functions to survive the heat. I dragged him out of the crawlway. In the main corridor, I activated my Vox bead. It functioned normally. I reported a medical emergency. Teams arrived within minutes. Kell survived. He spent 4 days in the Medici Bay recovering from severe hyperthermia, dehydration, and the beginning of organ stress. When he was released, he requested transfer. The request was denied. He served another 2 months before dying when a power conduit he was working on discharged through his body. I was not punished for surviving that incident. The ship had extracted what it wanted. Kell's death was ensured the moment he entered that crawlway with me. Whether he died immediately or months later was irrelevant. The ship had demonstrated that my survival was conditional, that it could revoke it whenever it chose, and that my complicity would be confronted in ways I could not escape. After Kell's death, something changed in me. Not dramatically, not a sudden revelation, just a gradual degradation of the part of me that still believed survival mattered. I continued my duties. I maintained the systems I was assigned to maintain. I logged the deaths that occurred around me, but I stopped caring whether I survived the next shift or died in it. The ship noticed. The incidents around me decreased further. Perhaps it had extracted everything useful from me. Perhaps I was no longer interesting prey. Seth survived to his 23rd month before the ship took him. Environmental control failure in his sleeping quarters. The atmospheric composition shifted. Nitrogen increased, oxygen decreased, carbon dioxide accumulated. He suffocated slowly over the course of 30 minutes while the quarters monitoring systems reported nominal conditions and the door refused to unseal. I was in the adjacent compartment. I heard nothing. Suffocation is quiet. I learned of his death when the morning shift change occurred and he did not report. They found him in his bunk, looking peaceful. The body showed no signs of struggle. He had simply stopped breathing and died. I collected his personal effects. Very few, we all traveled light. Among them I found a small notebook, actual paper bound in worn synthetic leather. Inside he had recorded observations about the ship. Dates, times, locations of incidents. Patterns he had identified. Theories about the machine spirit's logic. The final entry was dated the night before his death. I think the ship is done with me. I have learned what it wanted to teach. I have become what it needed me to become. There's nothing left to extract. If this is my last entry, let it be said, I understood, I participated. I am not innocent, neither are any of us who survived this long. I added his notebook to Halorn's carved bird. The 2 objects sat on my shelf, memorial to the only connections I had formed that approached significance. I continued. Years passed, measured in the deaths I witnessed and logged. The ship's patterns became so familiar they were background reality, no more remarkable than gravity or the recycling of air. New crew arrived. Most died. A few survived longer. None reached the tenure Seth or I had achieved. I became a fixture in Section 17, the ancient one, the survivor. New ratings looked at me with something between hope and horror. Proof that long-term survival was possible. Evidence of what that survival cost. I offered neither warnings nor guidance. I had learned that interference was futile. The ship chose according to its own logic. My role was witness, nothing more. During what I estimated was my 7th year aboard, records had become unreliable. the ship's chronometers displaying inconsistent data with increasing frequency. I was assigned to a deep maintenance task. The lower engineering decks near the plasma reactors, rarely accessed. The kind of assignment usually given to expendable crew or those marked for termination. I accepted it without question. By that point, I had stopped assessing assignments for danger. Everywhere aboard was dangerous. Resistance was meaningless. The task required me to inspect coolant systems in a section that had been sealed for decades. The official record claimed the section had been isolated due to radiation contamination, since cleared. I suspected the truth was simpler. The ship had killed so many crew in that section that even the Navy's casualty tolerance had been exceeded, and they had simply abandoned it rather than continue feeding personnel into it. I unsealed the access hatch. Multiple locks, heavily corroded, requiring significant effort. The air that escaped was stale, decades old, carrying the smell of rust and something organic that had decayed long ago. Inside, the section was dark. Emergency lighting had failed or been disabled. I activated my handheld luminator and entered. The corridor was narrow, pipes and conduits creating a maze of metal. Every surface was covered in a thin layer of dust. My boots left clear prints, the first footprints in decades. The walls were lined with small shrines, more densely packed than in active sections. Each shrine held candles that had burned down to nothing. Prayer strips so old the ink had faded to illegibility, icons of the Emperor corroded to vague shapes. I counted the shrines as I walked, 17 in the first 30 meters, each one presumably marking a death location. The concentration suggested extraordinary casualty rates, even by the Malice's standards. At the end of the corridor, I found a small chamber. Perhaps it had been a crew rest area originally, or a storage space. Now it was something else. The walls were covered in writing, not official markings, not maintenance notations, personal writing, carved into the metal with tools or fingernails or anything that could score the surface. Names, dates, prayers, screams rendered in text. The entire surface of all four walls was dense with overlapping inscriptions, carved by dozens or hundreds of different hands, across what must have been yours. I began reading, "The ship is hungry. It does not sleep." Rating Helvik, Year 8, 47.M40. I have prayed until my throat bled. The machine spirit does not listen. It feeds. Tech Adept Moros. Year 8, 51.M40. My brother died here. My friend died here. I will die here. The ship remembers us as fuel consumed. Rating unknown. Date illegible. We are not crew. We are sacrifice. The ship accepts our deaths as tribute. In exchange, it serves in battle. This is the arrangement. This has always been the arrangement. Petty Officer Grund, Year 903.M40. I survived 4 years. I thought I understood. I understood nothing. The ship permits survival only to make the eventual death more meaningful. I'm being saved for something specific. Rating. Jerris, Year 9, 81.M40. The inscriptions continued, layer upon layer, century upon century. The chamber was an archive of witness, crew members leaving testimony in the only way available to them. I found space on a wall near the entrance, a small patch relatively clear of existing text. Using a maintenance tool, I carved my own addition. I am rating Vec. I have served aboard for 7 years. I have witnessed 243 deaths by my count. I could have helped some, I chose not to. I am not innocent. I am not victim. I am component. The ship taught me this. I learned well. Year 017.M42. I completed the coolant inspection. The systems were degraded but functional, requiring minor repairs which I performed. I sealed the access hatch behind me when I left. The chamber remained, its walls covered in centuries of testimony that no one would read, except the ship. I believe the ship knew, that it had always known, that the chamber existed because it wanted these testimonies recorded. We were not just fuel. We were witnesses. Our deaths meant something, not to the Imperium, not to the Navy, but to the ship itself. It consumed us, yes, but it also archived us. Every death became part of its memory, part of its identity. We fed it not just with our labor and our lives, but with our awareness that we were being consumed. That was the final revelation. The ship was not merely malevolent. It was conscious in a way that required witness. It killed us because our deaths, observed and recorded and remembered, fulfilled some function we could not fully comprehend. We were sacrifice, yes. But sacrifice to what? To the machine. To something older that lived within the machine. To the Imperium's endless hunger for service, regardless of cost. I did not know. I would never know. I continued serving. 8 years. 9, 10. The ship and I reached an understanding that transcended survival instinct. I existed within its spaces as a long-term archive, carrying the memories of all those who had died. Halon, Seth, Kel, Petrock. Hundreds of others whose names blurred together but whose deaths remained distinct in my memory. New crew still arrived. The cycle persisted. I was sometimes assigned to train them in basic maintenance tasks. I taught them what they needed to perform their duties. I did not teach them to survive. The ship chose who survived. I'd long since accepted that I had no authority to interfere. During my 11th year, I began to notice changes in my own cognition. Memories becoming less linear, more fragmented. Timelines blurring. I could remember specific deaths with perfect clarity, but could not always recall the sequence in which they occurred. I functioned adequately for my assigned duties, but my internal experience was degrading. Perhaps I was simply aging. Perhaps the prolonged stress and malnutrition and exposure to the ship's malevolence had damaged cognitive structures beyond repair. Or perhaps the ship was consuming me differently now, not killing me but integrating me, transforming me into something closer to itself. I did not resist. Resistance had no meaning. I exist now in a state I can only describe as distributed. I perform my duties when assigned. I sleep in my bunk when schedules permit. I eat the provided rations. I witness the deaths that occur around me. But my sense of continuous self has fractured. I am aware moment to moment, but those moments do not always connect to form coherent narrative. I am the oldest surviving rating aboard the Undying Malice by my best knowledge. 12 years of service, perhaps 13. The chronometers no longer display consistent information. Time has become unreliable data. The ship continues. It has served for 2,000 years. It will serve for 2,000 more. Crew will cycle through its corridors, die in its compartments, be replaced by new crew who will die in turn. The pattern is eternal. The arrangement persists. I have become what Halorn warned against and what Seth accepted. I am not victim. I am not crew. I am archive. I carry the testimony of all those consumed, stored in degrading biological memory. functional until I am finally eliminated and replaced by the next long-term survivor who will carry the same burden. The carved bird sits on my shelf. The notebook rests beside it. Small monuments to connections that almost mattered but ultimately dissolved into the pattern. I do not touch them anymore. They are relics of a self that no longer fully exists. Sometimes I think about the chamber in the deep engineering section, the walls covered in testimony. I wonder if I should return there, add to my inscription, record the additional years and deaths. But I do not. The testament was complete when I first carved it. What I have become since is not worth additional record. The ship killed me years ago. What remains is simply processing the aftermath. The slow degradation of the corpse, still walking through maintenance routines. I am not alive. I am not dead. I am archived awareness, waiting for final termination that may never arrive because the ship has found a use for me in this state. This is what it means to serve aboard a ship where the machine spirit is genuinely malevolent. Not to die quickly in glorious battle, not to be honored for faithful service, to be consumed slowly, transformed from individual into archive, into component, used until nothing remains but the function you perform and the memory of having once been something more. The Imperium requires this. 10,000 years of unending war require this. Someone must feed the machine. Someone must become fuel. The ship accepts our sacrifice and in exchange serves in battle, destroys the Emperor's enemies, protects the borders of human space. This is the arrangement. This has always been the arrangement. I continue serving. I will continue until termination. The ship has taught me well. I learned. I adapted. I survived by becoming less than human, by accepting complicity, by choosing continuation over resistance. And in the deep hours of the shipboard night, when the corridors are empty and the only sound is the eternal vibration of the plasma reactors and the whisper of recycled air through ancient ventilation systems, I can hear the ship breathing, satisfied, sated for the moment, waiting for the next feeding. I am part of that breath now, indistinguishable from the machine, archived, integrated, consumed. This is my testimony. I am rating Vec. I served aboard the Undying Malice for 12 years. I witnessed, I participated, I became what I beheld. The ship continues. It always continues.